pretty little scene. Let them rush to the VIP suite. Don't they know whose ground they stand on? This entire foundation is my song. He can point his finger, make his choice, but his assets echo my own voice. Every wire, every glowing chart, a quiet masterpiece of art. Let him play his little part. The true long game is in my heart. The long game is in my heart.
When Helena Vale Sterling heard her husband tell the doctors to leave her in the corridor, she did not cry out. She lay half-curled on a narrow emergency gurney beneath a strip of white light that made everything look unforgiving. The ceiling panels, the stainless steel rails, the blood dry in a dark crescent near her hairline. Her left wrist throbbed. Her ribs burned each time she tried to take a full breath. Somewhere close, a machine beeped impatient, in different rhythm. Somewhere farther away, a woman was sobbing. Rubber soles whispered across polished tile. The air smelled of antiseptic, cold metal, and the faint, expensive perfume Helena had once found on the collar of her husband's shirt. "Mr. Sterling, we need to assess both patients," one of the doctors said, trying to sound firm and respectful at the same time. "Mrs. Sterling may have internal injuries." Adrian did not even lower his voice. "Bianca is bleeding," he said. "My wife is conscious. She can wait." The words landed more cleanly than a slap. Helena kept her eyes closed because opening them felt like surrendering the last piece of privacy she had left. Conscious, as if wakefulness were proof of safety, as if pain became polite when it did not scream. She heard the quick rustle of a nurse adjusting papers at the foot of her bed, felt hesitation gather in the silence, and then felt it break. "Take Miss Cross to the executive maternal suite," Adrian said. "Call Dr. Mara. I want the best team on her now." Someone shifted near Helena's shoulder. "And Mrs. Sterling?" the nurse asked softly. A pause. One heartbeat. Then two. "Stabilize her," Adrian said. "Leave her for the moment." Leave her. The phrase seemed to settle into the fluorescent air and stay there, bright and cold. Helena had known for months that something in her marriage had gone hollow. She had known by the careful way Adrian stopped touching her in passing, by the late meetings that came wrapped in vague explanations, by the sudden importance of appearances, of photographers, of curated smiles in hospital newsletters and charity brochures where he positioned her like a tasteful object beside his growing reputation. She had known by the pity in certain glances, by the too-fast silence that arrived when she entered a room. But knowing a truth in fragments was not the same as hearing it spoken over your body. A set of wheels rushed past. Voices rose and hushed. Somewhere down the hall, another patient groaned. Helena opened her eyes just enough to see the corridor bending away into a shimmer of white and silver. Through the moving legs and swinging doors, she caught a glimpse of Adrian's profile, sharp suit, dark hair, jaw set in urgent concern. Not for her. Never for her. Beside him, on another gurney already being turned toward the private lift, lay Bianca Cross under a cream blanket, one hand dramatically pressed to her stomach. Bianca wore Helena's scarf. That small detail nearly undid her. It was a soft charcoal scarf with a hand-stitched hem, one her late mother had given her years ago. Helena had left it in Adrian's car that morning. The nurse near Helena murmured, "I'm so sorry," in the voice of someone who knew she should not have seen what she had just seen. Helena swallowed, tasting copper. On the wall opposite her bed hung a framed black-and-white photograph of the old hospital. Its original brick building, its first generation of nurses, its founder standing rigid in a wool coat with solemn eyes. She had passed that photograph 100 times before without studying it. Tonight it stared back at her like a witness. Footsteps approached again, slower now. A female voice, smooth, familiar, edged with disdain, entered the corridor. "Where's Adrian?" Claudia Sterling asked. Helena did not need to see her mother-in-law to picture the expression on her face. Annoyance first, calculation second. "He's gone upstairs with Miss Cross," a nurse replied. And Helena? Another silence. In observation. Claudia exhaled through her nose. Well, Bianca should not be upset any further. Make sure the press office hears nothing about this. Then, after the faintest pause, in a tone so dry it almost disappeared, "Helena has always been overly delicate. Helena stared at the photograph until the edges blurred. Her body ached. But the deeper pain was colder than injury. It came from a place with no visible bruise, a place built over years out of restraint, loyalty, accommodation, and all the sentences she had swallowed to keep peace where peace had never truly existed. A junior doctor finally stepped toward her with a scanner in hand. "Mrs. Sterling, can you hear me?" "Yes," Helena wanted to say. "I heard all of it," but she said nothing. She let the silence stay where it had fallen, heavy and exact, because something old and quiet was shifting inside her now. Not rage, not panic, something steadier, something with edges. At the far end of the corridor, the private lift doors closed on Adrian and the woman he had chosen. Helena watched the numbers above the lift begin climb, and though no one around her understood it yet, that was the moment his life began to come apart. Before that night, most people who knew Helena Vale Sterling thought they understood her. They thought she was gentle, in the harmless way, elegant in the decorative way, soft-spoken because she had nothing difficult to say. They saw a woman in her early 40s who wore good wool coats without visible labels, pearl studs that had belonged to her mother, and low-heeled shoes suitable for long hospital corridors. They saw a woman who remembered orderlies' names and sent handwritten condolence notes when staff lost family members. They saw Adrian Sterling's wife, gracious at fundraisers, quiet at executive dinners, useful in photographs, forgettable in meetings. They were wrong in the way people often are when a woman carries herself with restraint instead of performance. Helena had been born into a story. She was never allowed to narrate aloud. Her mother, Amelia Vale, had been the eldest child of Samuel Vale, founder of Vale Crown Health Systems, the sprawling hospital empire that had begun as one charitable institution and grown, over 4 decades, into a vast network of research centers, teaching hospitals, specialty clinics, rehabilitation campuses, and private medical towers spread across continents. Newspapers called it a healthcare dynasty. Analysts called it a medical empire. In the language of finance, it was a $65 billion machine. In Helena's childhood, it was simply the place that stole her grandfather from family dinners and made strangers lower their voices when they said the surname Vale. Amelia had walked away from that world at 26. She married a literature lecturer named Thomas Hale, moved into a sunlit house filled with books and old jazz records, and raised Helena with a life so carefully ordinary it felt almost ceremonial. There were libraries, school runs, packed lunches, secondhand novels, and rainy afternoons spent reading beside the window. Helena learned to make tea before she learned multiplication. She learned early that dignity had nothing to do with applause. Then her mother got sick. Cancer took Amelia in slow, humiliating stages that stripped glamour from everything. Helena was 16 when she first learned how cold hospital waiting rooms could feel even in summer, how fear changed the sound of adult voices, how doctors spoke faster when they believed families did not understand medicine. She also learned that kindness could alter the shape of suffering. A nurse who tucked a blanket around Amelia's feet, a porter who smuggled in extra pillows, a palliative specialist who spoke to her mother like a person instead of a prognosis. Those years marked Helena in ways that never left. She did not become a doctor, though everyone expected she might. She studied health ethics and patient advocacy instead, then spent her 30s working inside the softer edges of hospitals, the places power often ignored. Family support services, end-of-life planning, patient experience review, donation programs that put books in pediatric wards and dignity kits in oncology units. She preferred listening to speaking, systems to spotlight, and substance to prestige. Samuel Vale, in public, barely acknowledged that his daughter had ever left him. In private, he watched Helena more closely than she knew. After Amelia died, he paid for Helena's education through trusts routed so discreetly she believed them to be old family provisions, not active acts of protection. He invited her to the hospital archives twice a year, always formally, always with stiffness that made affection look like obligation. Yet each time she visited, he asked what she had seen on the wards, what patients feared most, where the system humiliated them without meaning to. Helena, thinking he merely enjoyed debate, answered honestly. He listened. Years later, when she met Adrian Sterling, she mistook ambition for steadiness. He was handsome and polished, camera-ready way certain men cultivate when they expect the world to become theirs. A surgeon first, then administrator by instinct, Adrian carried confidence like a tailored garment. He knew how to hold a room. He knew how to make older board members feel respected and younger staff feel chosen. He knew where to stand when photographs were taken. He knew how to look at Helena as if the noise around them had dimmed. For a time, she believed him. He admired her calm, he said, her seriousness, her refusal to compete with louder people. He told her she saw the human parts of healthcare that executives forgot. He spoke tenderly about building something meaningful together. When they married, Helena thought perhaps she had found a man who understood that real strength did not always raise its voice. Samuel Vale attended the wedding in black tie, expression unreadable. He danced once with Helena, laid a hand against her shoulder, and said quietly, "Do not make yourself small to keep peace, child." It was the closest he had ever come to giving advice that sounded like love. Helena remembered that sentence often in the years that followed, especially when Adrian's success accelerated. He moved from senior strategy roles to chief executive responsibilities with startling speed. People praised his brilliance. Articles praised his vision. Claudia Sterling praised the heavens to the sun she believed had finally risen to his rightful height. Claudia had never liked Helena, though she wore civility well enough in public. She preferred women with visible ambition or visible submission. Helena offered neither. Worse, she did not flatter. She did not chatter. She did not chase the Sterling's approval. Claudia interpreted quiet as weakness because she had spent her life wielding noise like a weapon. At first, the fractures in Helena's marriage came disguised as inconvenience. Adrian missing dinners. Adrian answering messages during funerals. Adrian saying, "You wouldn't enjoy this meeting," when board discussions ran late. Adrian laughing lightly when she flagged ethical issues around premium access, and saying, "You always see the emotional side first." The emotional side, as if it were separate from the moral one. By the time Samuel Vale died, Adrian had become indispensable to the public face of Vale Crown. The old founder's death plunged the organization into structured mourning and careful succession. There were committees, legal reviews, closed-door meetings, market tremors, and endless speculation over where effective control truly rested. Helena assumed, as many did, that the board and legacy trust would continue the company's direction while executives like Adrian steered operations. She did not know her grandfather had made other arrangements. She did not know that in the final years of his life, he had grown quietly distrustful of nearly everyone around him. He saw opportunists in the boardroom, vanity and philanthropy, and a creeping culture of luxury beginning to contaminate institutions built for care. He saw Adrian's charm and understood its appetite. He saw Helena's steadiness and understood its rarity. So he did what powerful old men sometimes do when they no longer trust a living. He placed his faith in paper, law, and time. Helena knew none of this. She only knew that after Samuel's funeral, her role in the system became increasingly ceremonial, while Adrian's became central. She chaired charity luncheons, opened pediatric gardens, delivered elegant remarks at memorial walls. Meanwhile, Adrian entertained investors, negotiated expansions, appeared on magazine covers, and acquired a hard, bright sheen of man who no longer doubted that the world would bend. Then Bianca Cross appeared. Bianca came in through branding and strategic partnerships, young, immaculate media savvy, with the smooth confidence of someone who had learned how much would be gained by studying powerful men and reflecting their vanity back at them. She understood optics. She understood desirability. She understood timing. The first time Helena met her, Bianca smiled too long. "It is such an honor," Bianca said, fingertips cool against Helena's hand. "Adrian speaks very highly of your work." "Not your husband. Adrian." Tiny things announce themselves long before scandals do. A note too familiar. A text that disappears too quickly. The special brightness in a man's face when a certain name is mentioned. Helena noticed. She noticed everything. But she had lived too long inside controlled environments to react to suspicion without proof. Instead, she kept doing what she had always done. She visited oncology families after dark when visitors had gone, and the truth in people's faces was easiest to read. She argued quietly for patient advocates to sit in discharge planning meetings. She asked why private donations seemed to reach executive lounges faster than emergency overflow wards. She watched staff split themselves in invisible hierarchies. VIP care above need, image above dignity. And all the while, those around her mistook her observation for passivity. By the week of the accident, Helena's marriage had become a carefully furnished room with no warmth in it. Adrian was seldom home before midnight. Claudia had begun making little remarks about lineage and legacy with the sharpened sweetness of someone testing a wound. Bianca's presence had spread to the hospital like expensive perfume. Subtle, undeniable, impossible to challenge without being made to look petty. Still, Helena carried herself with composure. That was her mistake in their eyes. They thought composure meant consent. They thought silence meant emptiness. They thought the woman who moved gently through their corridors did not belong to the foundation under their feet. And on the night Adrian chose to walk past her broken body for another woman, every one of those assumptions moved a step closer to its own destruction. The weeks before Helena's collapse had not been loud. That was what made them so exhausting. Nothing in her world shattered in one obvious motion. It eroded. It wore away at the edges through repetition, omission, and the kind of social cruelty that always leaves room for denial. At breakfast one morning, Adrian stood nodding his tie in the reflection of the dining room window while Helena read over notes for a patient family symposium she was hosting later that week. Rain trembled softly against the glass. Their coffee had gone lukewarm. He glanced at her papers and smiled in that absent, managerial way he had begun using with her more and more. "You're still doing that panel on grief navigation?" "That panel on grief navigation," Helena said, calm as ever, "is for families whose children are in long-term care." He gave a vague nod. "Right. Good. Important." Then, without looking up, he added, "Try not to make it too heavy. Donors respond better to hope." Helena lifted her eyes from the page. "Families respond better to honesty." He slipped his watch on. "And this is why you should leave messaging to communications." He did not mean it as a joke. That was the part he no longer bothered to hide. At the hospital, the slights came dressed in efficiency. Invitations omitted. Meetings rescheduled without notice. Decisions implemented before her review could matter. A patient dignity initiative she had spent 6 months designing was shelved in favor of a premium hospitality expansion for executive clients. When she asked why, the chief financial officer shifted uneasily and said that came from Adrian's office. When she raised concerns about 2 emergency rooms being understaffed during weekend peaks, she was thanked for her compassion and redirected toward areas more aligned with community engagement. Community engagement, another polished phrase for the places women were asked to stand when real power had already left the room. Bianca understood the architecture of humiliation instinctively. She almost never crossed a line openly. She simply made sure Helena was always near enough to feel it. At a donor's luncheon for the maternity research wing, Bianca arrived 20 minutes late, wearing cream silk and carrying Adrian's private talking points. She moved easily among investors, laughing just a little too softly, leaning just a little too close. When Helena stepped toward the podium to begin her remarks, Bianca touched her elbow. "Oh," she said with a smile made entirely of polish. "Adrian asked if I could handle the presentation deck. He said you prefer the human stories." Prefer. As if Helena were incapable of numbers because she cared about people. Helena looked at her hand on her sleeve until Bianca removed it. "Then handle the deck," Helena said. Bianca blinked. She had expected resistance, not grace. Later, Helena watched on the edge of the ballroom as Adrian praised innovation, revenue resilience, elite maternal care access, and the future of the women's health portfolio. He never mentioned Helena's advocacy work. He never mentioned that most of the research grants highlighted that afternoon had been structured by teams Helena fought to fund. He spoke as though the hospital existed chiefly to expand itself. When applause rose, Bianca's eyes found Helena across the room. Not guilty, triumphant. Claudia's cruelties were older, less polished, more intimate. "You've lost weight," she observed one evening over dinner at the Sterling's townhouse, where the silver was heavier than necessary, and the candles never softened anyone's face. "Stress does not suit you, Helena." "I'm fine," Helena said. Claudia sipped wine. One hates to see a marriage become all ceremony. Adrian did not look up. A few moments later, Claudia turned to him. Bianca was radiant at the luncheon. Such energy, such freshness. These younger women do seem to arrive with purpose. The fork in Helena's hand remained steady. I imagine purpose can look different at different ages, she said. Claudia smiled without warmth. Can it? Adrian exhaled, as if both women were inconveniencing him. There had been losses in Helena's life that the Sterlings treated like personal defects. 2 miscarriages. 1 surgery after the second that left her doctor cautiously honest and Adrian increasingly remote. Helena had grieved privately, because grief under observation often becomes spectacle. Adrian had attended the facts of those losses, not the pain. Claudia treated them as a failure in succession planning. She was too refined to name directly. By the time Bianca's name began appearing in connection with Adrian's schedule more frequently than propriety permitted, Helena had already spent years understanding what it meant to be valued for grace while being denied seriousness. She noticed a change in staff behavior first. A nurse who went silent too quickly when Helena entered a lift. An executive assistant who stopped saying, "Mrs. Sterling, would you like to see the revised guest list?" and began saying, "Adrian's office already finalized it." A florist delivering white orchids to Adrian's private suite with a note accidentally tucked wrong side up. Helena saw Bianca's initials before the assistant corrected it. None of this would have been enough on its own to provoke the sort of scene lesser marriages survive through denial. Helena did not confront because she understood the economy of power around men like Adrian. If accused too early, they made your intuition look unstable. If challenged without proof, they made your dignity look theatrical. And Helena had never been theatrical. She watched. She listened. She stored details in the still place inside her that did not forget. One evening, long after visiting hours had ended, she walked to the pediatric wing, carrying sketchbooks donated by a local arts foundation. The corridor lights were dimmed to amber. Somewhere, a lullaby played softly from a mobile over a child's bed. The hospital at night revealed its soul more honestly than it did by day. Tired nurses leaning into door frames. Janitors buffing the shine back into floors. Everyone else scuffed thoughtlessly. Families sleeping in chairs with coats over their knees. Fear made humble by fluorescent light. This was the Helena few executives ever saw. The one who sat beside frightened mothers without checking the time. The one who learned which fathers had stopped eating. The one who could look at suffering without trying to package it into language marketable enough for board reports. That night, as she stepped out of the family lounge, she saw Adrian at the far end of the hall. He was not alone. Bianca stood close enough that no explanation could make it innocent. Adrian's hand rested at the small of her back. Not guiding, claiming. Bianca's head tilted toward him, smiling in a way Helena had not seen her smile at anyone else. They were both too absorbed to notice Helena in the dim corridor. Helena stood very still. A cleaning cart hummed past behind her. Somewhere nearby, a child coughed in sleep. Adrian bent his head and kissed Bianca once, quickly, intimately, like a habit already formed. Helena did not step forward. She did not announce herself. She turned quietly and walked the other way. That was what restraint looked like when it was mistaken for powerlessness. It was not ignorance. It was not fear. It was choice. The next morning, Adrian came home late with rain on his coat and said he had been in back-to-back planning sessions. Helena poured tea into 2 cups and placed one before him without comment. He looked briefly uncomfortable, which told her he understood. Somewhere beneath his arrogance, that silence could be more frightening than accusation. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm listening," Helena replied. He frowned slightly, but the moment passed. Then came the board memo. The new luxury maternal pavilion, a highly publicized expansion, would be named not after Helena's late mother, whose advocacy for compassionate care had inspired the original endowment, but after Claudia Sterling. Claudia, who had never spent one unnecessary second beside a sickbed. Helena received the memo by email, copied with 3 dozen others, as though the insult were purely administrative. She went to Adrian's office that afternoon. The executive floor was all hushing glass. Assistants moved in measured lines. Coffee smelled darker there, richer, as though money altered even the roast. Bianca was emerging from Adrian's private conference room when Helena arrived. She stopped only for a fraction of a second. "Mrs. Sterling," Bianca said smoothly. "He's in between meetings." Helena regarded her with that steady, unnerving calm Bianca had never successfully interpreted. "So am I." She entered without waiting. Adrian was at his desk, tie loosened, sleeves folded, playing the part of burdened visionary. Behind him, the city stretched wide and gray through 30 feet of window. He looked up, annoyed rather than surprised. "Helena," she placed a printed memo on his desk. "You named the maternal pavilion after your mother." He glanced down. The board loved the optics. "The original proposal carried my mother's name." He leaned back, lacing his fingers. "Amelia Vale does not test well with our current donor base." The sentence was so nakedly cynical that even Helena, long practiced in disappointment, felt something in her chest go cold. "She died in one of these hospitals," Helena said quietly. "You used her story in your campaign films." "That was different." "How?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "Because sentiment is useful when managed properly." For a moment, the room seemed to lose all sound. Helena looked at him as if studying a stranger in improved lighting. Then she asked a question she should have asked months earlier. "And Bianca? Is she being managed properly, too?" The slightest pause, the slightest shift behind his eyes. Then contempt. He stood. "Do not come into my office inventing scandal, because you feel sidelined. I saw you. And if you did," he said, voice flattening into something colder than anger, "what exactly do you intend to do about it?" There it was, the core of him, not denial, confidence. Helena's hands remained loose at her sides. "Nothing today," she said. He laughed once, softly, relieved by what he mistook for surrender. She left his office with the elevator air pressing cool against her face, and by the time she reached the ground floor, the first fractured decision had already formed. Then came the gala night, then the car skidding in rain, then the corridor, then his voice choosing another woman, while Helena lay bleeding beneath the name her family had built. By the time the hospital lights settled over her in that white, merciless hall, she was no longer waiting for proof. She was waiting for the precise shape of the truth. And truth, when it finally arrived, did not knock. Helena was discharged from observation just after dawn, though discharge was too graceful a word for what happened. A resident with tired eyes reviewed her scans, confirmed 2 cracked ribs, a severe concussion risk, deep bruising, and a sprained wrist, then spoke with the strained politeness of someone navigating orders from above. "You should stay under watch for another 12 hours, he said. "Then why am I being released?" His silence answered first. Helena looked at him steadily until he forced himself to say, "The executive floor is under strain. There have been room reallocations." Room reallocations. The language of institutions was always most elegant when trying to hide disgrace. She signed the forms with her good hand. Her wrist ached. Her hair was loosely pinned back. Someone had brought her fresh clothes from home, a navy wool dress, stockings, her flat black shoes. Her wedding ring sat on the bedside tray, where she had removed it in the night, because the skin around her fingers had swollen. She left it there a little longer than necessary, staring at the small circle of gold until it looked less like commitment than evidence. When she stepped into the corridor, the hospital had shifted into morning brightness. Staff moved faster. Coffee carts rolled past. Elevators opened and closed with efficient chimes. Her body wanted rest, but another instinct pulled her upward, toward the executive maternal floor where Bianca had been taken. Helena did not take the public lift. She walked. Each breath hurt. Each step along the quiet hallways felt deliberate. Nurses looked at her with fleeting concern, then recognized her and replaced concern with professional caution. She passed the old founder's portrait again. This time she did not look away. The executive maternal level was hushed in a way ordinary suffering never was. Carpet muted footsteps. The lights were warmer. Fresh lilies perfumed the air. Doors were thicker, privacy more expensive. A woman in pale cashmere sat outside one suite with a tablet and a security badge. She rose when Helena approached. Mrs. Sterling, the woman said carefully. Mr. Sterling requested privacy this morning. I'm sure he did, Helena replied. She kept walking. Inside the suite, voices drifted through the slightly open inner door. Claudia's first. You must not let this upset the baby. Then Bianca's, breathy and aggrieved. I never wanted drama. I told Adrian she would make everything difficult. Helena stopped at the threshold. Adrian answered with weary tenderness, the sort he had not used with Helena in years. You are my priority. Let me handle the rest. Something old and human tried to rise in Helena then. Not jealousy. Not exactly. Grief, perhaps, for the years she had spent believing a careful love could survive on patience alone. Grief for the woman she had been when she still thought dignity would protect her from disrespect. Grief for the fact that betrayal sounded so domestic when spoken quietly enough. She pushed the door open. All three of them turned. Bianca sat propped among white pillows in a silk robe that did not belong in a hospital room. Adrian stood beside her, one hand still on the bed rail. Claudia, immaculate as ever, held a cup of tea as though the room were a hotel suite and not a chamber of moral collapse. For half a second, no one moved. Then Adrian's face hardened. Helena, she looked first at Bianca's wrist. Her scarf was folded neatly there now, tied like an accessory. That tiny theft, the wearing of something intimate, maternal, irreplaceable, made the whole room suddenly obscene. I came for my scarf, Helena said. Bianca stared. Claudia set down her cup. Adrian took a step forward. This is not the time. No, Helena said, her voice leveled despite the pain threading through her ribs. That was last night, when your wife was bleeding downstairs. Bianca's hand moved protectively over her stomach. I think I should rest. You should, Helena said, not looking at her. Rest is usually given to patients who need it, not to women who borrow other women's lives. Adrian's expression changed then, not to shame, but to anger that Helena had spoken plainly in front of witnesses. Enough, he said. The word cracked through the room. A nurse at the door froze. Another staff member passing outside slowed almost imperceptibly. Social humiliation has a sound. Professionals hear it instantly. Helena met Adrian's eyes. How long? He did not answer. Claudia stepped in instead, because women like her always prefer to weaponize realism when men wish to avoid it. Long enough, she said coolly, for circumstances to become more complicated than your feelings. Helena turned to her. Claudia continued, voice smooth as polished stone. You have been a respectable wife. No one denies that. But life does move. Families require continuity. Adrian requires peace. This childish insistence on public hurt helps no one. Childish. Helena felt the full insult of it travel through her body more sharply than the fracture in her ribs. Bianca lowered her eyes, performing softness. Adrian said nothing. That silence was its own confession. And the child? Helena asked. Bianca looked up, almost triumphant now that the truth had entered the room. Adrian moved to her side instinctively. Claudia answered, at last, something this family can build forward from. The words hung there. A family can build forward from. Not you, not your marriage, not the life you carried and lost, not the years you gave. Helena saw then with perfect clarity that they had not merely betrayed her. They had already reorganized the emotional furniture of their lives around her absence. They had moved her into the category of inconvenience before she had even finished bleeding. The nurse at the door shifted again. Another 2 staff members had gathered in the hall under the false pretense of checking schedules. Witnesses, which made what came next worse. Adrian lowered his voice into the formal tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable in front of subordinates. You should go home. Helena did not move. He turned slightly toward the nurse. Please have someone escort Mrs. Sterling downstairs. She is not well enough to be here. The nurse did not respond immediately. Helena looked from Adrian to the nurse and back again. Not well enough. He exhaled in controlled irritation. Helena, do not make a scene. That sentence, more than anything else, revealed the shape of his arrogance. He had chosen another woman. allowed his mother to reduce Helena to failed utility, left her injured in a public corridor, and still believed that if Helena objected, the breach of manners would be hers. Claudia picked up her tea again. Dignity, Helena. However painful this is, one must preserve dignity. Helena let the silence lengthen until even Bianca seemed uneasy inside it. Then, very slowly, she crossed the room. No one stopped her. She untied her scarf from Bianca's wrist with steady fingers, folded it once, then twice. Bianca flinched as if touch itself were accusation. Helena placed the scarf over her own arm, turned to the bedside table, and saw there a velvet box she recognized instantly. Inside was a bracelet Adrian had bought Helena on their 10th anniversary and claimed had been lost in a hotel transfer months earlier. The room changed temperature around her. She closed the box. No tears came. That stage had passed. Instead, Helena removed her wedding ring from the pocket of her coat, where she had placed it after leaving observation. She set it gently beside the bracelet on Bianca's bedside table, an offering returned to the altar it had truly served. The gesture was so quiet that everyone in the room understood it at once. Adrian's face sharpened. "Don't be dramatic." "No," Helena said. "I'm being clear." She looked at him fully for the first time since entering. "Last night you told him to leave me." She could have said. She did not. She no longer intended to spend truth on men determined not to deserve it. Instead, she spoke softly enough that everyone leaned in to hear. "You mistook my silence for dependence." Adrian gave a brittle laugh. "Helena," she raised one hand, and he stopped. Not because her gesture was forceful, but because something in her expression had altered beyond his reach. "I will not argue in front of staff," she said. "I will not plead. I will not compete with a woman. In my place, where are my things? And I will never again stand where I am tolerated." Claudia scoffed. "Where exactly will you stand, then?" Helena turned her head slightly, as if the answer had already arrived from somewhere beyond the room, somewhere honest. Then she walked out. Behind her, Adrian said her name once, sharply, not with remorse, with warning. She did not turn back. In the corridor, the gathered staff lowered their eyes, ashamed by proximity. Helena moved through them with her spine straight, despite the pain. At the elevator bank, she stopped only once, long enough to ask the senior nurse on duty, in a voice as composed as if requesting water, who was the family counsel currently handling founder legacy matters. The nurse blinked, startled by the question. "Miriam Shaw, I believe." Helena nodded. "Thank you." The elevator doors opened. As she stepped inside, scarf folded over one arm, ring gone from her hand, face pale and perfectly still, she made a decision that would change everything. Not to confront, not to beg, not to expose them and hurt, but to learn exactly what had been kept from her, and then act from a truth with a steadiness none of them had prepared for. The doors slid shut, and for the first time in years, Helena stopped trying to preserve a life already willing to abandon her. Miriam Shaw arrived in Helena's temporary apartment that evening just after the rain stopped. The apartment belonged to one of the hospital's quiet corporate residences used for visiting clinicians and board members. Helena had not gone back to the Sterling townhouse. She had no appetite for grand rooms full of curated emptiness. Instead, she chose a smaller place overlooking the river, where the furniture was tasteful, anonymous, and mercifully free of history. Outside, the city glistened under recent rain. Inside, everything was still. A kettle whispered in the kitchen. Helena sat at the dining table with her ribs banded, her hair loose over one shoulder, and a legal pad before her containing only 4 words. What did he think I was? When Miriam entered, she carried no theatrics with her. She was in her 60s, silver-haired, sharply dressed, and composed of the kind of discipline that only comes from decades spent around wealth without ever serving it emotionally. She had been Samuel Vale's counsel for 22 years. Helena knew her only in fragments at memorials, annual governance dinners, the edges of board photographs. Miriam set a sealed ivory envelope on the table between them. The sound it made against the wood was almost delicate. "Your grandfather instructed that this be delivered under one of 2 conditions," Miriam said. Helena looked at the envelope, but did not touch it yet. "Which condition have we met?" Miriam met her gaze directly. The first was your 42nd birthday. The second was evidence that your welfare, rights, or dignity had been materially compromised by any individual exercising operational influence inside Veil Crown. Helena felt a cold understanding begin to sharpen. Miriam continued, "This morning, multiple reports reached my office regarding your treatment in the emergency department, the reallocation of critical care resources, and the use of executive privilege for a non-spousal person relationship involving the acting chief executive. Those reports triggered review. The review activated the second condition. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Helena placed both hands flat on the table to steady the sudden strange motion of her thoughts. What is in the envelope? Your name, Miriam said, as your grandfather intended the world to learn it. Helena opened it. Inside was a letter in Samuel Vale's unmistakable hand, along with a packet of legal documents, share certificates, trust instruments, governance directives, and one photograph she had never seen before. Her mother, young and unsmiling, standing in front of the original hospital with Samuel beside her, not touching, yet somehow united in profile. Helena read the letter first. My granddaughter, if you are reading this, then either time has done its patient work, or someone has shown you exactly why I did not place this institution in easier hands. You were raised away from machinery because your mother wanted you spared its hunger. She was right, but distance does not erase blood, and character does not improve merely because money makes speeches about service. I built this system from one promise, that the sick would never be made to feel lesser because they were frightened, poor, inconvenient, unconnected, or alone. As it grew, men arrived who loved the size of it more than the purpose of it. I learned too late that legacy is not preserved by brilliance. It is preserved by conscience. You do not know this, because I chose silence until necessity made truth useful. Through the AM Vale Continuity Trust, all controlling voting shares under my personal authority were transferred irrevocably to you 3 years before my death. The structure remained blind to public markets and inactive in governance optics until activation conditions were met. In plain language, the institution is yours, not because you sought it, because you did not. If they have wounded you, do not answer with noise. Noise is what small people make when they fear consequence. Answer with order. Answer with law. Answer with a calm that terrifies the dishonest. Do not protect those who would leave another human being in a corridor. Samuel. Helena finished reading and had to set the page down because her hands had begun, at last, to tremble. Miriam let the silence remain. The current enterprise valuation of Veil Crown Health Systems is approximately $65 billion, she said quietly. You hold effective controlling interest through the trust, 51% voting authority, with immediate enforcement power under activated conditions. The board was aware that a continuity mechanism existed, but not the beneficiary identity. Only your grandfather, myself, and one retired trustee knew. Helena stared at the papers. The hospital, the research towers, the teaching campuses, the clinics, foundations, endowments, logistics arms, pharmaceutical partnerships, an entire architecture of institutional power Adrian had strutted through as though proximity had made it his. All of it had been sitting silently beneath her name. She laughed then, once, not from joy, from the stark absurdity of a life rearranging itself in complete silence while other people kept talking. Unbelievable, she said. No, Miriam replied, merely well concealed. Helena looked again at Samuel's letter. Answer with order. Answer with law. What does Adrian know? Nothing beyond what he assumes, Miriam said. And men like him assume ownership very quickly. For the first time since the corridor, Helena felt something almost like steadiness return. Not because of the money, though the scale was enormous, but because power had finally revealed its true geography. She had not been standing empty-handed in those rooms. She had been standing unbriefed. That would end now. The hours that followed moved with the precise quiet of surgery. Miriam laid out the architecture of control. Emergency governance rights, board summoning authority, audit triggers, ethics review mechanisms, executive suspension procedures, internal communications protocols. Helena listened, asked pointed questions, took notes, and felt old parts of herself align. Her mother's moral clarity, her grandfather's patience, her own lifelong refusal to confuse gentleness with surrender. By midnight, the dining table had become a landscape of paper. There were documents showing discretionary executive expenditures authorized by Adrian's office for strategic hospitality that directly funded Bianca's travel, housing, and private clinical accommodations. There were internal memos rerouting charitable funds toward image-heavy projects while patient support programs stalled. There was security footage from the emergency corridor. There were signatures, timestamps, authorizations, witness accounts. There was also, tucked into a side folder, another envelope in Samuel's hand. For when you decide, Miriam said, inside was a simple embossed card bearing one instruction. Return what no longer belongs in your house, before you remove what never belonged in mine. Helena almost smiled at that. Her grandfather had loved precision even in vengeance. The next morning began the quiet preparation. Helena did not call Adrian. She sent no angry messages, made no public statements, and gave the press office nothing. Outwardly, she was recovering from injury. Inwardly, she was assembling consequence. She met with Gideon Price, long-serving board chair, in a private library room no executive under 40 ever used because it contained more books than screens. Gideon, grave and visibly shaken by Miriam's disclosures, addressed her as Ms. Vale before correcting himself. Helena let it pass. I should have looked harder, he admitted. Yes, Helena said. You should have. He accepted the sentence without defense. That at least recommended him. She met Rosa Delgado, the senior emergency nurse who had stayed nearest her bed that night. Rosa gave her statement with fierce professionalism and eyes bright with contained fury. You were triaged appropriately, Rosa said. Then override instructions came in verbally once Mr. Sterling identified Miss Cross. We objected. We were overruled. By whom? Rosa named them. Helena wrote each name down. Later, Helena sat alone in the apartment and unfolded her recovered scarf across her lap. The fabric still held the faintest trace of Bianca's perfume beneath the older scent of cedarwood from her mother's wardrobe. Helena ran her fingers along the hand-stitched hem and thought of all the women who'd been told to stay gracious while being erased. That afternoon, she sent 3 sealed envelopes. The first from Adrian's office with no note inside, only her wedding ring in a velvet pouch. No explanation, no demand. Emptiness can speak with remarkable clarity. The second went to the board governance committee, authorizing an emergency closed session under continuity provisions. Miriam handled formal language. Helena added only one handwritten line at the bottom. No patient in this institution will ever again be taught what abandonment sounds like. The third went to the archives department requesting the original dedication records from maternal care endowment established in Amelia Vale's memory and later suppressed in branding revisions. By evening, Adrian was calling once, twice, then 12 times. Helena watched the screen light up and go dark on the table. He sent messages next. We need to talk. This has gone too far. Don't involve outsiders. Bianca had a medical emergency. You're being emotional. Call me. Emotional. It was almost touching, the predictability. Helena placed the phone face down and returned to reading audit summaries. Across the city, preparations continued for the Vale Crown Centennial Leadership Gala, an event Adrian had been planning for months. Investors, press, senior clinicians, government partners, donors, and department heads would gather in the central atrium to unveil a new strategic expansion roadmap. Bianca was slated to appear. Claudia had already approved seating. The event would be public enough to wound and formal enough to matter. Miriam asked, Would you prefer to act before the gala? Helena looked out at the river darkening under evening light. No. May I ask why? Because they humiliated me in the house my family built, Helena said. They can meet truth there, too. Miriam inclined her head. The next 2 days passed in controlled intensity. Helena reviewed every relevant policy. She confirmed badge deactivation chains, executive housing privileges, discretionary fund access, security authority, media containment strategies, and physician conduct implications. She visited the old founder's office her first time alone. using a key Miriam placed silently in her hand. The room smelled faintly of leather and dust. Samuel's cane stood in the umbrella rack. On the desk sat a paperweight shaped like the original hospital building. She touched nothing for a long time. Then she sat, opened the top drawer, and found a final note addressed only to H. If you have arrived here in silence, you are ready. When she rose from that desk, the last uncertainty had left her. On the morning of the gala, Helena dressed slowly, not like a wife attending her husband's event, not like a wronged woman performing injury. She wore an ivory suit with clean lines, her mother's pearls, low black heels, and no wedding ring. Her bruises had yellowed faintly at the edges but remained visible enough that concealing them would have felt dishonest. Miriam offered makeup. Helena declined. "Let them see," she said. As she reached for her coat, she glanced once more at the documents in the leather folder waiting on the table. The trust papers, the suspension orders, the restored dedication charter, the corridor report. So much power, so much ruin, all of it folded into paper. All of it waiting for the right moment to be slid across the right table. Outside, the city carried on, unaware. Inside Veil Crown, chandeliers were being polished, podium microphones tested, champagne chilled, press badges printed, and seating plans adjusted so that Adrian Sterling could step into a room full of witnesses and speak as though the institution belonged beneath his shoes. Helena let him have those last few hours. Then she wanted to take it back. The atrium of Veil Crown's flagship hospital had been designed to inspire confidence before anyone spoke a word. For stories of glass rose above black stone floors polished to a mirror sheen. Suspended lights glowed like captured moons. A sculptural installation of flowing steel curved above the central staircase, meant to suggest both heartbeat and horizon. On gala nights, the place lost what little resemblance it had to a hospital and became something closer to a cathedral for money. Florals arranged with mathematical restraint, waitstaff gliding soundlessly, cameras stationed where human vulnerability usually sat. By the time Helen arrived, the room was full. Department chiefs in dark suits, senior nurses in formal dress uniforms, donors with lacquered smiles, politicians, medical journalists, foundation trustees, board members arranged in calibrated importance. There were screens bearing the Veil Crown crest and a massive illuminated banner behind the stage reading, "A Century of Care. The future begins now." Helena paused at the back entrance for one breath. People noticed her in waves. First the nearest staff, then the second ring of observers, then the room itself, as recognition moved through it in a subtle ripple. Mrs. Sterling, injured, alone, unannounced, calm. Adrian was at the podium, reviewing his remarks when he saw her. Even from across the atrium, Helena could see the shift in him, the brief tightening of the jaw, the flash of annoyance quickly covered by public poise. Bianca stood near the front in deep green silk, one hand resting strategically over her abdomen. Claudia was beside her, draped in silver gray and superiority. The master of ceremonies began the introduction. Applause rose. Adrian stepped to the microphone, every inch the assured executive. "Tonight," he said, smiling into the light, "we gather to honor legacy while embracing transformation." Helena moved forward. Her heels made almost no sound on the stone, but heads turned anyway. There are moments when rooms sense power before language explains it. Adrian continued, though his eyes tracked her progress. Veil Crown has always stood at the intersection of innovation and compassion. Miriam Shaw entered from the side aisle then, followed by Gideon Price and two members of internal governance. That changed the air completely. Adrian faltered by half a beat. Not enough for the crowd to name it, enough for Helena to see. At the foot of the stage, a security director stepped uncertainly toward Miriam. She handed him a document. He read the first lines, then straightened instantly and moved aside. Helena ascended the stage steps without hurry. Adrian leaned away from a microphone and hissed under his breath, "What are you doing?" She did not answer. Miriam approached the podium first, requesting the microphone with formality so absolute that even the technicians responded instinctively. The audience murmured. Glasses lowered. Cameras refocused. "Good evening," Miriam said. By order of the AM Vale Continuity Trust and pursuant to emergency governance authority now in effect, this event is suspended for immediate board action in the presence of institutional witnesses. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Adrian recovered first, or tried to. He laughed lightly into the microphone. I'm afraid there has been some procedural misunderstanding. Mrs. Sterling is recovering from a personal incident, and... Sit down, Adrian, Gideon said. It was the first time many in the room had heard the board chair use his first name without courtesy attached. Adrian stared at him. Excuse me. Helena stepped to the podium then. The room watched her. Bruised cheek, ivory suit, no ring, no visible tremor. When she spoke, her voice was not loud. It did not need to be. My name, she said, is Helena Amelia Vale. The use of her maiden name moved through the atrium like a draft. She looked out over the crowd. Staff who had overlooked her, executives who had patronized her, board members who had placed her at the edges of photographs, nurses who had seen too much, donors who believed institutions were built by men at microphones. Then she continued, Most of you know me as Adrian Sterling's wife. Some know me through patient advocacy, family support services, or memorial care programs. A few of you knew my mother. Almost none of you know why I'm standing here. She opened a leather folder and removed the trust documents. Cream paper, black ink, seals. Following the death of founder Samuel Vale, controlling authority over Vale Crown Health Systems did not pass where many assumed it had passed. Through a legally structured continuity trust established years earlier, 51% voting control of this institution, and its global network transferred to me. A collective intake of breath. Not loud, but everywhere. Adrian stepped forward. That is absurd. Miriam handed a second copy to the nearest legal auditor. It is verified. Bianca had gone white. Claudia looked, for the first time in Helena's presence, genuinely unsteady. Helena did not look at them yet. She let the room absorb the truth first, because reversals matter more when witnesses have time to understand what they're seeing. This institution, she said, fingers resting lightly on the papers, is currently valued at approximately $65 billion. I did not know the full extent of my authority until 2 days ago, when an emergency clause was triggered by documented ethical breaches occurring within these walls. Now she turned toward Adrian. He had stopped performing charm. Without it, his face looked harsher, younger, and more frightened than Helena had ever seen it. 3 nights ago, she said, I was brought to this hospital injured after an accident. While under assessment, I heard the acting chief executive instruct medical staff to deprioritize my care in favor of his mistress, who was then moved to an executive suite using institutional privilege and resources. The word mistress hit the room harder than shouting would have. No embellishment, no flourish, just placement. Bianca made a strangled sound. Adrian gripped the edge of the podium. You cannot do this publicly. Helena met his eyes. You did publicly, she said. You just did not expect the public to include consequences. A murmur rose, swift and shocked. Cameras were no longer decorative now. They were witnesses. She lifted another document. Here are the corridor reports. Staff statements. Resource overrides. Discretionary expenditures funding private accommodations. Here are the authorizations from your office. Here are the hospitality charges assigned to the system, while critical access beds remained under review. Here are the suppressed endowment records removing my mother's name from the maternal care charter for branding purposes. Gideon signaled. Copies began moving to the front rows to designated board observers, compliance leads, and legal counsel. Paper passed from hand to hand like judgment. Adrian lowered his voice, desperate to restore private control in a room that had ceased to belong to him. Helena, we can discuss this. Not here. No, she said gently. We cannot. Bianca rose halfway from her seat. This is harassment. Helena finally looked at her. It was not a cruel look. That was what made it unbearable. It is accuracy, Helena said. Bianca sank back down. Claudia stepped forward next, because women like her mistake lineage for immunity until the final possible moment. Whatever technical device has been engineered here, family matters do not justify dismantling leadership in public. Helena turned fully toward her. Family matters, she repeated. You stood in a hospital room and told me this family could move forward from another woman's pregnancy while your son's wife was being removed from care downstairs. Do not ask for private handling now. Privacy was a luxury you denied me. Claudia's mouth tightened, but no reply came. Helena returned to the microphone. Effective immediately, Adrian Sterling is suspended from all executive authority pending full ethics, fiduciary, and medical conduct review. His badge access, discretionary privileges, housing authority, and communications control are revoked as of this moment. The security director, already waiting on instruction, stepped toward the stage. Adrian laughed again, but there was no confidence left in it. You cannot possibly believe this circus will hold. Helena's expression did not change. It already has. The director approached Adrian with a formal hand. Sir, your badge. For one suspended second, the room witnessed a precise, instant arrogance recognized structure. Adrian looked around for loyalty and found procedure instead. Slowly, disbelievingly, he removed his badge and placed it in the director's hand. The soft click of plastic against leather might as well have been thunder. Helena spoke again before the room could dissolve into reaction. Bianca Cross is to be discharged from all executive hospitality classifications immediately. Any medically necessary care will continue under standard patient protocol, equal to every other patient under this roof. No less, no more. Bianca whispered, Adrian. He did not answer. He could not. And one more matter, Helena said. She lifted the restored dedication charter bearing the original maternal endowment. This pavilion will not carry the name of a woman who treated compassion as weakness. Effective tonight, the Maternal Care Center will bear its intended name, the Amelia Vale Center for Women and Infant Dignity. This time the reaction was not only shock, it was something else. Something like moral recognition. Among the clinicians in the front rows, a few began to clap before stopping themselves. Then one senior nurse, silver-haired and unsmiling, let her hands meet once. Then again, the sound spread, not celebratory, not frivolous, but solemn, earned. Helena let it pass over her without changing posture. When it settled, she delivered the final words that would be remembered long after the screens went dark. This hospital was built to care for the vulnerable, not flatter the powerful. If a woman can be left in a corridor because she is inconvenient to a man's private appetite, then we have already begun to rot from the inside. I will not allow that rot to continue. She closed the folder. In this institution, no one will ever again receive dignity by status, while another is denied it by silence. Then she stepped away from the podium. No shouting followed, no dramatic music, no theatrical collapse. Only the clean, terrible sound of a hierarchy breaking in public. Security moved to Adrian's side. Bianca was escorted gently but unmistakably from the front row. Claudia remained frozen where she stood, as though age itself had finally failed to protect her from consequence. Board members began speaking in urgent low clusters. Journalists wrote faster than etiquette permitted. Staff looked at Helena as if seeing, all at once, the person who had been moving quietly through their hallway for years without ever truly being seen. Adrian said her name one last time, not as husband, not as master of the room, as a man speaking upward through ruins. Helena turned only enough to acknowledge the sound. His face was pale now, stripped of polish. You planned this. No, she said. You planned it. I just stopped absorbing it. Then she descended the stage. The atrium parted for her, and every person in it understood, with the force of revelation, that the woman they had mistaken for incidental had been the axis all along. By morning, the story had already moved beyond the hospital walls. Not the affair. Affairs were ordinary. Not even the suspension. Executive scandals surfaced and vanished every quarter. What stunned people was a combination of moral clarity and structural force. The injured wife publicly revealed as majority owner of a $65 billion health empire. The acting chief executive removed his own atrium after directing care away from her toward his mistress. The details spread because they were too precise to blur. Inside Veil Crown, consequence arrived faster than gossip. Adrian's office was sealed before sunrise. His access to internal systems terminated. Compliance teams entered with boxes, scanners, and chain of custody forms. The board opened formal investigation into resource misuse, fiduciary misconduct, retaliatory administrative behavior, and ethical breaches tied to patient prioritization. By the second day, affiliated medical licensing bodies had been notified due to his interference in care pathways. Claudia attempted, briefly, to salvage influence through old networks and social pressure, but there is a humiliating purity to documented evidence. Tone cannot outmaneuver it. Reputation cannot charm it. The very people who once indulged her began answering more slowly, more carefully, with the distance reserved for sinking things. Bianca disappeared from hospital-facing circles almost at once. Her consultancy agreement was terminated pending audit review of undeclared benefits and preferential use of institutional resources. Her private apartment, funded through a partnership housing code Adrian had approved, was frozen. Medical care continued where necessary, because Helena had meant what she said about equality. But the velvet layer of exception was stripped away. She became, for the first time in months, simply another patient under policy. Helena never asked where Bianca went afterward. She did not need to. What mattered to her was a reordering inside the institution itself. On the Monday after the gala, Helena chaired her first executive ethics review. The same conference room where Adrian once told her sentiments should be managed now held senior clinicians, compliance counsel, nursing leadership, board observers, and department heads sitting straighter than usual beneath muted lights. The city shone pale through the windows. Water glasses remained mostly untouched. Helena entered without entourage. No dramatic wardrobe. No jewels beyond her mother's pearls. A dark suit, a leather folder, her scarf folded neatly beside her chair. When she sat at the head of the table, no one mistook the symbolism. "Before we begin," she said, "I want one principle established clearly. This review is not revenge. It is correction. If anyone in this institution fears they are being punished for proximity rather than conduct, speak now." No one spoke. She nodded once. Then we proceed with facts. That became the tone of her leadership in the days that followed. Not spectacle. Sequence. Emergency triage protocols were rewritten to prevent informal executive overrides. Patient dignity advocates were embedded directly into incident review teams. Executive hospitality funding was separated from acute care logistics with full public transparency. Staff reporting lines were fortified against retaliation. The Amelia Vale Center Charter was formally restored, this time with language Helena wrote herself. Care loses its soul the moment status outranks need. Nurses responded to her first. Nurses always know the difference between image and stewardship. Rosa Delgado met her outside the emergency department one evening after shift change. The air smelled faintly of rain coming through the automatic doors. Stretchers rolled in and out under fluoresceum. Rosa looked almost embarrassed by the emotion in her own face. "We should have done more that night," she said. Helena shook her head. "You stayed." Rosa swallowed. "I stayed because leaving felt wrong." "That," Helena said, "is exactly how institutions survive." Word spread quietly that Helena remembered names, that she read reports herself, that she did not punish truth when it was inconvenient. People who had avoided her before began speaking with new honesty. A junior resident admitted how often VIP requests distorted care flow. A billing analyst came forward with expense irregularities linked to Adrian's office. A long-overlooked social worker submitted a 12-page memo on how grieving families were steered away from executive corridors, as though SAR itself were bad for donor optics. Helena read every page. She also signed the divorce papers without ceremony. No interview. No statement. No courtroom theater. Miriam slid the envelope across Helena's desk late one afternoon while sunset turned the windows bronze. Helena read the final settlement terms, amended one clause to remove any lingering honorary privileges Adrian might retain in legacy spaces, and signed. "Would you like them sent today?" Miriam asked. "Yes," Helena said. "Any note?" Helena thought for a moment, then shook her head. The absence of a note was a note. As for Adrian, the public collapse of status proved harsher on him than any shouted accusation could have been. Men who had once called him visionary began using words like pending review. Invitations vanished. A strategic advisory post he expected overseas was withdrawn. His face appeared in the business pages for 1 week, then receded into the colder language of legal updates and governance briefs. The world rarely mourns disgraced men for long, unless they remain useful. He requested a private meeting twice.